This is part of a joint project called Commitment to Equity Project, this paper. The project is coordinated jointly by Tulane University and the Inter-American Dialogue. And it covers 12 countries in Latin America, and its incidence analysis, that is the impact of taxes and benefits on poverty, inequality, and other measures of well-being. What we do in this paper, we argue that there is another measure that needs to be introduced to the analysis of the impact of fiscal policy on poverty, which is not captured by any of the standard measures. And what we call this is fiscal mobility, because what we're going to be looking at is for people who start within a certain socioeconomic group, which in our case, the main interest is with people who are either ultra poor are those who are below $1.25 a day, those who are extreme poor, $1.25 and $2.50 a day in purchasing power parity, and the moderate poor, $2.50 to $4 a day. Those are the three groups we're primarily interested in, and we want to know to what extent when you add taxes and transfers, in particular indirect taxes, how much downward movement is there from being non-poor to poor, and within the poor from being moderate poor to extreme poor, from extreme poor to being ultra poor. What you usually use to measure what the impact of fiscal policy is are the following indicators. You look at the inequality indicators. You look at the poverty indicators like the head count, the poverty gap, the squared poverty gap. Then you also look at incidence indicators that tell you how much is the tax burden per decile, for example. You also use summary statistics to assess the progressivity of taxes or transfers. What we show is that by all these indicators, something can look very good. Like a system can look very good. It can reduce inequality, can reduce poverty, extreme and ultra poverty, can have the bottom deciles being net receivers from the fiscal system. You can use progressivity indicators and they come out to be the fiscal system on the tax side looks progressive, the spending also looks progressive, and you can still have quite a significant amount of people who are poor becoming poorer. And that's why we want to emphasize this, because our point is that a fiscal system should not make the poor poorer. If at all, the state should make the poor not poor, right? By definition. And we apply this to Brazil. And we find in Brazil that 15% of the moderate poor become extreme poor after you add all the taxes, and 4% of the extreme poor become ultra poor. We're talking of people that in the ultra poor group, they earn 83 cents PPP per day. In the extreme poor, they earn around 133 PPP per day. So these are very poor people. We find that these people, on average, may lose up to 10% or more of their income, those who lose, the losers within this, because of how the system taxes them. And this is even after you account for all the transfers, like Bolsa Familia and everything. So even if you account for the transfers, there's going to be, in some countries, losers. The losers are poor and they become poorer. And we want people to know this. We have data for a bunch of countries, but we're using Brazil as a case to illustrate why the measure is important, because in Brazil is where we see the largest downward movement. In other countries, this downward movement is much smaller. So what we're saying is that with the Brazilian data, you could go away with the impression that what the government is doing for the poor seems perfectly okay, because, like I said, the head count, the poverty gap and the squared poverty gap falls. Overall inequality with different measures falls. The incidence for the bottom shows that they're net receivers. The progressivity data is showing that the system is overall progressive, the summary statistics, but you still have 15% of the extreme poor the moderate poor becoming extreme poor, and 4% of the extreme poor becoming ultra poor. And this type of measure, we think, has to be incorporated when you are doing this analysis of what a fiscal system does, in particularly to people who are poor. Because I don't think anybody ex ante would think it's a good idea that the fiscal system actually makes poor people poorer.